I'm Linda Hasselstrom, and this is my tribute to Badger Clark. I probably encountered Badger Clark poetry for the first time in the pages of the Custer County Chronicle, which was the local county newspaper, because they published a lot of his poems while I was growing up. My first Badger Clark book, which is pretty battered and beat up, I got in 1955 as a present from my mother. I was 12 years old. Badger Clark, of course, was the poet laureate of the state at that time. And I later, when I was in 8th grade, my class, my teacher, decided that they'd like to have Badger Clark come down and speak to our group. So I wrote a letter to him and asked him if he would come down and talk to us, and I got a very gracious letter back. And he said that he wasn't going to be able to do it that spring because he had too many other obligations, but we would talk again in the fall. And that was the fall that he died, so I never actually got to meet the man. This copy of Skylines and Woodsmoke, I think, was brought out as a memorial. Well, it was first published in 1935, but then a memorial version was brought out later. Published by the Chronicle, the local newspaper, in 1958. A numbered, limited numbered edition. And my grandmother gave this to me. And typical of my grandmother, she wrote her name in the back of it. To my dear little granddaughter Linda on her 15th birthday, July 14th, 1958. Because my grandmother never got to finish the 8th grade, and for her to write in a book, my mother must really have had to persuade her that this would be a treasure that I would value all my life, because for her to write in a book was a very unusual and amazing thing. This one I don't carry around. I bought a different copy to carry around because I don't want anything to happen to that one. One of my real joys, of course, I said I never got to meet Badger Clark, and only after he was dead did I get to visit his home, which has been preserved as part of the park now, Custer State Park, the Badger Hole. And it's a wonderful place to visit because they have kept it. They have his boots lined up just the way he had them. It's a tiny little house, but you can tell it's the house of a scholar and a man who paid attention to writing and who paid attention to the natural world. Badger Clark died in 1957, and during that summer, Warren Lee had gone and asked him to speak some of his poems for a tape recording. So we actually have recordings of Badger's voice reading some of his poems.
I don't need no art exhibits when the sunset does her best, paint an everlasting glory on the mountains to the west, and her opera looks foolish when the night bird starts his tune, and the desert's a silver mountain by the touches of the moon. Just a riding, who can envy kings and czars when the coyotes down the valley are singing to the stars, and he's riding. And a finer life than riding would be mighty hard to find. Just a riding, splitting long cracks through the air, stirring up a baby cyclone, ripping up the prickly pear as I'd ride.
And after he had heard his voice reading his poems, he jotted down he jotted down a few lines of verse. It's probably the last poem, and it's published in this Skylines and Woodsmoke. When I shall top the last divide and journey down the other side, what vestige here on earth will be to prove that there was once a me? My old guitar, some printed scraps, old boots, old photographic snaps, a book or two upon the shelf, but nothing very like myself. I dwelt on gloomy thoughts like these until one day I met the Lees, who in my regular routine asked me to talk to a machine. And after my poetic clack, the Lees contraption talked right back. And every word and every tone came out exactly as my own. "It's me," I cried, "it's me," forgetting grammar in my glee. So thus I may go talking on after I've seen my final dawn, and partially defeating death, my voice will long outlive my breath. For now the grim old saying fails, in these days dead men do tell tales. I just love that as an example of his humor, his low-key humor. And as they said, this probably is his last verse. He died not long after that, and that gives me a wonderful picture of this man who was able to do a lot of what he liked all of his life, and to die with such a good attitude.